What happens when a comedian known for saying whatever he thinks sits down with daytime TV's most protective host? In just 35 seconds, everything exploded into one of the most shocking confrontations ever captured on live television. Before we get into this absolute chaos, make sure you subscribe to our channel. We bring you daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals. And trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Last night on Loose Women, what was supposed to be a light conversation about Ricky Gervais's new comedy special turned into one of the most shocking moments in British daytime television history. The studio audience got way more than they bargained for, and by the end of it, security was involved and cameras captured every explosive second. It started simple enough. Ricky walked onto the set with that trademark smirk of his, waving to the audience who were clapping and cheering enthusiastically. Ruth Langsford, sitting in the host chair, smiled warmly and welcomed him to the panel with open arms. The other panelists were there too, Janet Street Porter and Colleen Nolan, all ready for what they thought would be a fun chat about comedy and entertainment. The atmosphere was light, friendly, exactly what you'd expect from a daytime talk show. "Ricky, welcome back to Loose Women," Ruth said, her voice friendly and professional. "The perfect host. It's been a while since we've had you here. We've missed having you on." "Yeah, well, you know how it is," Ricky replied, settling into his seat and getting comfortable, adjusting his jacket. "Busy schedule, lots of people to offend, the usual routine. Can't disappoint my fans." The audience laughed warmly. It seemed like everything was going fine. The energy in the room was positive. Ruth shuffled her cards and leaned forward slightly, preparing to dive into the first question with that professional smile still on her face. "So, let's talk about your new special. You've called it your most controversial yet, which is saying something coming from you. You've never been one to shy away from pushing buttons. But some people are saying you've gone too far this time. What do you say to that criticism?" Ricky shrugged casually, looking completely unbothered by the question. He'd clearly heard it a million times before. "People always say I've gone too far. That's literally my job description at this point. I'm a comedian. I say things that make people uncomfortable because that's what comedy does. It challenges ideas. It pushes boundaries. If everyone's comfortable, if nobody's squirming a little bit, then I'm not doing my job properly." Ruth nodded slowly, but her expression was starting to shift into something more serious. You could see it in her eyes. "Right, but there's a difference between challenging ideas and just being cruel for the sake of it, isn't there? Some of the jokes in your special have really hurt people. Real people with real feelings who've reached out to us." "Hurt people?" Ricky repeated, raising his eyebrows and looking genuinely confused by the suggestion. "They're jokes, Ruth. Nobody's getting physically hurt. Nobody's being attacked. If you don't like it, don't watch it. It's really that simple. There's a million other things you could watch instead. Netflix has thousands of shows." Janet Street Porter jumped in, trying to keep things balanced and move the conversation forward in a productive direction. "But Ricky, when you have such a huge platform and millions of people watching around the world, don't you think you have some kind of responsibility to be careful about what you say? To think about the impact?" Ricky turned to look at her, his expression hardening just a bit. You could see the shift in his body language, the way he sat up straighter. "No, actually, I don't think comedians have any responsibility, except to be funny. The moment you start censoring yourself because someone might get offended, you're not doing comedy anymore. You're doing propaganda. You're letting other people control what you can and can't say. That's not art, that's cowardice." The audience made a collective "ooh" sound. Some people nodded in agreement, while others shook their heads disapprovingly. Ruth's smile was completely gone now, replaced by a look of growing frustration that she was struggling to hide. "That's quite a strong word, propaganda," Ruth said, her tone cooling noticeably. You could hear the change in her voice. "But let's be specific here. Let's talk about what you actually said. In your special, you made several jokes about trans people. And a lot of people, including members of that community, have said those jokes are harmful and dangerous. They're saying your words contribute to a culture of discrimination and violence. Ricky leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms defensively across his chest. Here we go. Here it comes. Look, I support everyone's right to live however they want. I really do. I have no problem with anyone being whoever they want to be. Live your life. But I also support everyone's right to make jokes about anything. Anything at all. You can't pick and choose what's okay to joke about based on who might get upset about it. That's not how comedy works. But when your jokes contribute to a culture where trans people are attacked, where they face violence and discrimination every single day, doesn't that matter to you at all? Ruth pressed, her voice getting sharper with each word. She was leaning forward now, really engaging with him directly. My jokes don't contribute to violence, Ricky shot back immediately, his voice rising. That's insane. That's an absolutely insane thing to say. If someone commits violence, if someone attacks another person, that's on them, not on a comedian telling jokes on stage. You're basically saying comedy causes violence, which is absolutely ridiculous. By that logic, violent video games cause school shootings, which we all know isn't true. It's been proven over and over. Ruth shook her head firmly, clearly not buying his argument for a second. I'm saying your words have power, Ricky. Whether you want to admit it or not, when you mock vulnerable groups, when you make them the punchline of your jokes, you make it easier for other people to dismiss their struggles. You normalize the mockery. You make it acceptable. Vulnerable groups? Ricky's voice was rising now, getting more animated and defensive. Everyone's vulnerable to comedy. Everyone. I make fun of everybody. I make fun of myself all the time. I make fun of religious people. I make fun of atheists. I make fun of rich people, poor people. Everyone. That's equality. That's actual real equality. Not this pick and choose nonsense where some groups are off limits. No, that's not equality, Ruth fired back, leaning forward in her chair and staring directly at him with intensity. Making fun of people who already face discrimination and violence in their daily lives is not the same as making fun of people in power. Surely you can see that. Surely you understand the difference between punching up and punching down. The other panelists were exchanging nervous glances now. Colleen Nolan looked like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Janet was sitting very still, watching the exchange carefully. The audience had gone quiet, sensing that this was turning into something more serious than anyone expected when they bought their tickets that morning. I can see that you want to control what I'm allowed to say, Ricky said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. That's what I can see. You want to be the arbiter of what's acceptable comedy and what isn't. You want to decide who I can make fun of and who I can't. You want to be the comedy police. I want you to take responsibility for your impact, Ruth countered firmly, not backing down an inch. I want you to acknowledge that your words affect real people, real human beings with feelings and lives. Is that really so much to ask? Is basic human decency too much to expect from someone in your position? Yes, actually it is, Ricky said flatly, not backing down an inch either. Because my impact is making people laugh. That's it. That's my only job. If some people don't laugh, if some people get offended, they don't have to watch. Nobody's forcing them. But don't sit here and try to tell me I'm responsible for how other people behave after they watch my show. That's ridiculous. Ruth's jaw tightened visibly. You could see her trying to maintain her composure, but the frustration was written all over her face. Her hands gripped the armrests of her chair. You know what, Ricky? I think you hide behind this "it's just comedy" excuse because you don't want to admit that maybe, just maybe, you've become the very thing you always claimed to hate. You've become the bully. The person who punches down at people who can't fight back. The studio went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Not a single person in the audience made a sound. Ricky stared at Ruth, his expression unreadable for a long moment. The tension was absolutely suffocating. The camera zoomed in on both their faces. "Excuse me?" he said quietly, his voice dangerous and low. "You heard me," Ruth continued, clearly deciding to go all in now. "There was no turning back. You built your entire career on pointing out hypocrisy and calling out powerful people who abuse their positions. You made your name going after celebrities and executives and people with real power. But now you're the powerful one, and you're punching down at people who have far less power than you do. You've become exactly what you used to mock. Don't you see that?" "Punching down," Ricky repeated slowly, shaking his head in complete disbelief. "That's such a bull's asterisk T phrase. I'm so sick of hearing it. Comedy doesn't punch up or down, it just punches. It just makes jokes about the absurdities of life, about things that don't make sense. And if you can't take a joke, if you're so fragile that words hurt you, that's your problem, not mine. The world doesn't revolve around your feelings." "It's not about taking a joke," Ruth said, her voice getting louder and more forceful. She was really worked up now. "It's about basic human decency. It's about recognizing that your platform gives you massive influence over millions of people around the world. And with that influence comes responsibility. Whether you like it or not, whether you accept it or not." "There it is again, responsibility," Ricky said mockingly, throwing his hands up in the air dramatically. "You people are absolutely obsessed with making everyone responsible for everything. I'm responsible for comedy. That's it. That's where my responsibility ends. I'm not responsible for your feelings. I'm not responsible for society's problems. I'm not responsible for fixing every single thing that's wrong with the world. That's not my job." Janet tried to interject again, raising her hand slightly and leaning forward. "Maybe we should take a step back here and—" "No, let him finish," Ruth interrupted sharply, still staring directly at Ricky with laser focus. Her eyes hadn't left his face. "Let him explain how making jokes at the expense of marginalized people is somehow brave and important. Let him explain how that's comedy. I want to hear this." "It's not about being brave," Ricky shot back, his voice rising to match hers. "It's about freedom. Freedom to say what you think. Freedom to make jokes about whatever you want. Freedom to not be censored by people like you who think they know better than everyone else. People who think they're the moral authority on what's acceptable. You're not the boss of comedy, Ruth." "Freedom," Ruth said, her voice dripping with disdain. She almost spat the word out. "You want freedom to hurt people without consequences. That's what this is really about, isn't it? You want to say whatever you want and never have to face any pushback for it. You want everyone to just accept it and shut up." "No one's being hurt by jokes," Ricky practically shouted, his face reddening now. His voice echoed through the studio. "Words aren't violence, Ruth. Jokes aren't weapons, they're just words. This whole narrative that comedy is dangerous is just a way to control what people are allowed to think and say. It's authoritarian. It's thought police." The tension in the studio was absolutely suffocating now. The air felt thick and heavy. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or stay silent. Some people looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. Others looked angry, nodding along with Ruth. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every single second of this disaster unfolding in real time. Ruth took a deep breath, clearly trying to compose herself and regain some professionalism. She straightened her posture. "Ricky, I've interviewed hundreds of comedians on this show over the years. Literally hundreds. And you know what the good ones, the truly great ones, have in common? They can be funny without being cruel. They can challenge ideas without dehumanizing people. They can make you think without making you feel terrible about yourself or others." "Oh, so now I'm not a good comedian?" Ricky said, his voice dripping with acid. He looked genuinely offended. "Is that what you're saying? After decades of success, after selling out arenas all over the world, after winning awards, after breaking records, I'm suddenly not good at my job? That's what you're telling me?" "I'm saying you're a talented comedian who's lost his way," Ruth replied, her voice steady but firm. She wasn't backing down. You used to make people think. You used to challenge power. You used to go after the people who deserved it. Now you just make people angry for the sake of being controversial. You're chasing shock value instead of genuine insight. You're going for the easy target. Good, Ricky snapped viciously. If my comedy makes you angry, that means it's working. Comedy is supposed to provoke. It's supposed to make you uncomfortable. It's supposed to challenge you. Safe comedy is boring comedy. Comfortable comedy is pointless comedy. If you're not offending someone, you're not saying anything worthwhile. There's a difference between uncomfortable and hateful, Ruth insisted, not backing down, even slightly. To you, maybe, Ricky countered quickly. But I don't accept your definition of hateful. I don't accept your arbitrary rules about what's okay to joke about and what isn't. And I sure as hell don't need your approval, or anyone else's, to do my job. I answer to my audience, not to you. Ruth's face was flushed now, her professional composure cracking visibly, small cracks appearing in the facade. You know what your problem is, Ricky? You're so obsessed with being edgy and controversial that you've forgotten what comedy is actually supposed to do. It's supposed to bring people together, to find common ground, to help us laugh at our shared human experience. Not divide us, not make people hate each other. That's one type of comedy, Ricky said dismissively, waving his hand like he was swatting away a fly. Not the only type. Some comedy is meant to divide, to challenge, to make people pick sides and think about why they're on the side they're on. And that's just as valid as your feel-good comedy. Maybe even more valid because it actually makes people think. Not when it hurts people, Ruth said firmly, her voice shaking slightly with emotion. Everything hurts someone. Ricky exploded suddenly, standing up from his chair. The movement was so sudden, it startled several audience members. That's life. That's the real world. You can't go through life expecting everyone to protect your feelings all the time. The world doesn't work that way. People say things you don't like. Deal with it. Grow up! The audience gasped collectively. Several people put their hands over their mouths in shock. Ruth stood up too, her eyes blazing with fury. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Don't you dare tell me to grow up, she said, her voice shaking with barely controlled anger. Don't you dare. I've been doing this job for years, decades even, and I've never had a guest be this disrespectful. You come on this show, you insult our viewers, you defend cruel jokes that hurt real people, and then you have the absolute nerve to act like you're some champion of freedom? Like you're some hero? I'm not acting like anything, Ricky said coldly, his voice like ice. I'm just being honest, something you clearly can't handle. You can't handle anyone who disagrees with your worldview, anyone who doesn't toe the line. What I can't handle, Ruth said, stepping closer to him, closing the distance between them, is sitting here and giving you a platform to spread your toxic nonsense. You want to make jokes that hurt people? Fine, do it somewhere else. But don't expect us to smile and nod along like everything's okay, like what you're saying is acceptable. I don't expect anything from you, Ricky said, grabbing his microphone and pulling it off roughly. The wire snapped against his shirt. Except maybe for you to remember what free speech actually means. But I guess that's too much to ask. Free speech is only for people you agree with, right? Free speech doesn't mean freedom from criticism. Ruth shot back immediately. You want to say whatever you want? Great. But we get to call you out when you're being a D***K. That's how it works. That's what free speech actually means. It goes both ways. The audience was on the edge of their seats now. Some were recording on their phones, knowing they were witnessing something explosive that would be all over social media within minutes. The other panelists looked like they desperately wanted to disappear into their chairs. This had gone way beyond anything they'd expected. You know what? Ricky said, tossing his microphone onto the chair, where it bounced and fell to the floor with a thud. I'm done here. I'm absolutely done with this nonsense. I came here thinking we could have an actual conversation, a real exchange of ideas, but clearly, you just wanted to lecture me about how I should do my job. This was a setup from the start. You never wanted a conversation. No one's lecturing you, Ruth said, but her voice was still sharp and cutting. We're asking you to be accountable. We're asking you to think about the consequences of your words, to think about the people who are affected by what you say. Accountable to who? You? Ricky laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and mocking. I'm accountable to my audience, the people who actually get my comedy, the people who understand what I'm trying to do, not to some daytime talk show host who thinks she's the morality police. Who appointed you as the judge of what's acceptable? Ruth's face went bright red. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. Get out. What? Ricky said, spinning around to face her directly, his eyes wide. I said, get out, Ruth repeated, louder this time, her voice echoing through the studio. This is my show, and I'm not going to sit here and let you insult me and our viewers. You want to leave? Then leave. Get out of my studio. Oh, I'm leaving, Ricky said, his voice full of contempt and disgust. But not because you're telling me to. I'm leaving because this whole conversation is pointless. You've already made up your mind about me, and nothing I say is going to change it. This was a witch hunt from the start. You brought me here to attack me. You're right about that, Ruth said coldly, her eyes narrowing into slits. I have made up my mind. You're a bully with a microphone, and I'm done giving you airtime. I'm done giving you a platform to spread your hateful views. Find another show to spew your garbage on. Ricky stared at her for a long moment, his jaw working. You could see the muscles in his face tensing. Then he shook his head slowly. Unbelievable. You people are so convinced of your own righteousness that you can't even see how authoritarian you've become. You're the real bullies here. You're the ones trying to control what people can say and think. Security, Ruth called out loudly, not breaking eye contact with Ricky for even a second. Her voice was steady and firm. Oh, you're calling security now? Ricky said with a harsh, barking laugh. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. This is just perfect. Can't win the argument, so you just kick me out. Very progressive of you, Ruth. Very tolerant. So much for that free speech you were talking about. 2 security guards appeared at the edge of the set, moving cautiously toward them. They looked unsure about what exactly they were supposed to do. The audience was completely silent now, watching in absolute shock as the situation spiraled completely out of control. I don't need your security, Ricky said, putting his hands up in mock surrender. I'm going. I'm leaving. But just so we're clear, this right here, this moment, this is exactly what's wrong with society today. Someone disagrees with you, and instead of engaging with them, instead of having a real conversation, you just silence them. You shut them down. You kick them out. You had plenty of time to engage, Ruth said, her voice steady but absolutely furious. You chose to be hostile and dismissive from the very beginning. That's on you. That's your choice, not mine. You could have had a real conversation, but you didn't want that. Whatever helps you sleep at night, Ricky muttered, turning and walking toward the exit, with deliberate, angry steps. Each footstep was loud and purposeful. And don't come back, Ruth called after him, her voice cracking slightly with emotion. Ricky stopped at the edge of the stage, right before the exit. He turned around one last time, pointing directly at Ruth with his finger outstretched. I wouldn't come back if you paid me £1 million. This show is a joke, and not the funny kind. It's pathetic. You're pathetic. With that, he walked off the set, his footsteps echoing loudly. The studio doors swung shut behind him with a loud, resounding bang that made several audience members jump in their seats. The sound reverberated through the entire studio. The audience sat in stunned silence, nobody quite sure what to do or how to react. Some people looked shocked, others looked satisfied, others just looked confused. Ruth stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, her chest rising and falling as she tried to compose herself. Her hands were shaking. The other panelists looked at each other with wide eyes, clearly unsure what to say or how to proceed from here. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds, Ruth smoothed down her blazer with shaking hands and turned to face the camera. Her professional mask was trying to slide back into place, but you could see the cracks. "Well," she said, her voice still trembling slightly despite her best efforts, "that certainly wasn't what we expected today. But sometimes conversations get heated when people have very different values." She took a deep breath and sat back down slowly, carefully, the professional mask sliding back into place bit by bit, but her hands were still trembling visibly as she picked up her notes. The papers rustled in her shaking hands. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of the aftermath, as the audience slowly began to process what they'd just witnessed. The shocked expressions, the whispered conversations, the people still recording on their phones, trying to capture every moment. It was absolute chaos.